For those of you that I haven't met before, I just want to make sure we're ready to go here. My name's Eric Nordberg. I'm the Dean of the Paul Meek Library. Glad to see so many people here in attendance in person. We're also live streaming this event, so I know we've got some people watching out in the big world. And then also our live stream link is going to be recorded and will be available at that same link. So if you have friends who weren't able to join us today that would like to benefit from this presentation, you can point them towards that link. It'll be on our site as well. It's wonderful to host events in this space. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out for those of you on campus that tomorrow we'll be having an event here at 4 o'clock as part of our monthly research series. We've invited Bonnie Daniel, who's with our Teaching and Learning Department in Instructional Technology, to give a presentation. And she said, well, I don't want to give a presentation, I want to have a panel come and talk about their work. So these are all faculty members who have taken up what we refer to as the scholarship of teaching and learning. So outside of their discipline, how do they improve their ability to actually teach in the classroom? So that'll be tomorrow here at 4 o'clock. Hope folks can come. On the back tables, we've also put out a little QR code for those of you that may be here who had registered as part of our Runway online platform for events. You can check in there to the site that we have. That will also help to generate a feedback form, which we'd love to have you fill out. We're getting better at this now. Sometimes the dean forgets to put things up on the monitor like he's supposed to. So, but please, we're trying to figure out the best way to improve these events, improve promotion of events, but then also get feedback from folks that is valuable for us as we move along. So look for one of those orange sheets on the back table when you're done if you have a chance. Today is a special event for us because it's a return to a series which had been built to great fanfare many years ago. We actually started the Paul Meek Literary Legacy Speaker Series in 2011. It was funded by a variety of sources. I see Dean Alexander is here from the College of Humanities and Fine Arts. I know that their college has been a supporter of this program. And then we were very fortunate in 2015 to have Ann Meek, Dr. Ann Meek, daughter of Paul Meek, who's the namesake of this building, make a more substantial donation and endow an account that actually presents money to us each year to continue this series. I would be happy to point out that Lisa Roney is here, and Meek's daughter, as well as Jenna Wright, one of the Meek family, extended family. And if you haven't been in Martin for very long and not met one of the various Meek cousins, as they call themselves, there's quite a group in the region, and we're very blessed actually to have their support for a variety of programs. So my thanks to all of those as we go along. As you'll see on the little flyer we've left on your chair, this has been a series to invite different authors to come and talk about their work. Some have chosen to do readings, some have talked about their work in a more disconnected way from what they actually write about, but the series has been a great opportunity for our campus to be exposed to literature, to literary figures, and particularly to new and upcoming authors. And so I think today is a perfect example of that, and I'm pleased that we were able to bring this back together. We actually had a speaker who was scheduled to be here in April of 2020, and then the world shut down. And so it's very nice after a few years to have this series begin again, and hopefully for us to rebuild that program. And I think actually today is a good way to do that. Our speaker today is going to be Dr. Rochelle Hurt. She's the author of several poetry collections. I'm apologetic today that we don't have the books for sale that we hope to. I'm told that the bookstore is going to have them later today or tomorrow, but I'm sorry that they weren't here for today. But for those of you that may have read the J Girls, a reality show, that was the piece that really kind of started to boost Rochelle's name out there. She was selected to win a literary award in Indiana. The book was published out of the Indiana University Press in just last year, 2022. But then before that, some of the others that you may have seen and that she'll be talking about today. I love the title, In Which I Play a Runaway. I actually like that collection a lot. It was fun to read. But then also, she revealed to me that she's not a native Floridian, but she's actually from gritty, industrial Johnstown, Ohio. Youngstown, Ohio. And that was also the inspiration for the other of her works that's been mentioned, The Rusted City. So a fellow Midwesterner coming from a former industrial city. She's been awarded a variety of prizes and fellowships in the work that she's done. That's allowed her to travel a little bit to do some of that work. I had a list here: Arts and Letters, Poetry International, the Vermont Studio Center, and a couple of others. She holds the MFA from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington and a PhD from the University of Cincinnati. She lives in Orlando, which I think always sounds dreamy to everybody in the Midwest. She could probably answer questions as to whether any of that is true, but then also teaches in the MFA program there and is our special guest today. So with that, I'll turn things over to Rochelle Hurt.
Thank you, Eric. I was just testing to see if the mic was on. I think it is now. Okay, so thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you coming out. I had a wonderful class session earlier today with the poetry and nonfiction classes. Got some great questions. I'm going to read a little bit from my second book, In Which I Play the Runaway, and then I'm going to read a couple of poems from the new book, The J Girls, A Reality Show. And then after that, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. So this book, In Which I Play the Runaway, this book for me was a way of exploring the idea of home and place and how place affects who we are, not just where we're raised, but when we move around, when we leave a place, do we become somebody else? Do we change based on where we are and where we're going? So there are several series in the book that explore that idea. One of them is about Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, so you'll recognize her when she comes up. Another series is about towns with strange names. And these are real towns. I've only been to one of them, but they've got names like Hurt, Virginia, which is my last name, I'm Alone, Wisconsin, one word. What else? Last Chance, California. There's an Only, Tennessee, not far from here. That was one of them. So I'm going to read a couple of those as well. And that was my chance to explore this question of how does a place affect your mental state, your emotional state. I'm going to start, though, with a prose poem. The book has lineated poems and prose poems, and the prose poems are sort of like little fables. So this one's called Bad Luck. The first time my mother learned how lightning loved her, it came through our TV. The light reached out and cupped her breasts, holding her for a minute before spilling into her belly, which lit up like a bulb. That's when we saw it. Something curled there, stone still, like a child carried too long. I called it regret, but my sister said she didn't believe in such sentimental things. We watched my father's touch grow brittle after that, chipping little by little against my mother's cheeks and withdrawing completely after the second storm, when light soaked through her hair in gray swaths and painted her fingernails white as eggshells. It became hard to say who in our house was more haunted. I was tapped twice, on the shoulder, on the hip, a finger of light. Twice it pulled me out like a fish from the ice, and twice I was thrown back to my body, a cradle of bone. I told my sister that it felt like a sudden loosening, a seal opening somewhere. Then that familiar tickle of liquid seeping down my thigh, like life sieving right through me. She said I shouldn't tell such stories. But only after my daughter was struck and walked out of it as out of a lake, resplendent, blinking the static from her eye, shaking drops of lightning off her tiny hands, were we certain. Conductivity, the textbooks called it. the easiest path down to the earth. Bad luck is what my father said, to be loved by a force like that. Every storm was a prayer, then silence, a fear of last words in the air. Eventually, he left us. My sister, too, for the desert. I wasn't surprised when my own husband vanished, terrified or simply tired of sharing his bed with our brand of death. You could smell it like smoke on our breath. My mother's skin had become translucent, and I could see a clearing burned inside her where regret used to sit. It was then I understood a woman's body as a bowl, open to what may fall into it. But no, loss is a choice, my mother said, to become the haunt you've run from. That was based on a true story I heard about a family that had, I think, at least 4 or 5 family members who had all been struck by lightning, and some of them multiple times. And I thought, well, that's got to be a poem or a story. This next one is one of the Dorothy poems. Dorothy tries. What pilgrim shadows, how stubbornly they tail you, children better left at home. The tawny stalker slinks, a sourpuss following that silver marauder, always after your heart, girl. You are dragging yourselves toward paradise, one brick, one brick. By now your feet are swollen to the size of pomegranates, pulsing fuchsia inside hand-me-down pumps. They'll callous your feet in no time. How cheap you look. And how long can you carry this limp man, throat full of straw, all impotence and good intentions? If I could find my heart in here, you say to the world, searching your basket, I could make it love you. But all you find inside is the little ashen dog drooling on the sandwiches. This next one is one of the town poems, and this is from Needmore, Indiana. So this is called Self-Portrait in Needmore, Indiana. As expected, after the wedding, the house became a cough we lived in, trembling in the throat of that asthmatic spring. The streets stacked and curved like fingers on a grease-knuckled hand gripping the waist of our Midwestern dream. We went sunblind inside just looking at each other. Death is not working, but wanting too much. My father's body was little more than a paper bag by the day he died and tumbled into a graveyard. I could have died, etching my name into the glass eye of my cage, a bay window painted with lace. The skyline in its expanse was a farce played out each night. Sometimes my reflection was the star of the show. Sometimes it was the child clapping from her seat, so looking out and looking in became the same thing. Sometimes it just rained for weeks. This book also kind of grapples, even though many of the stories are fictional, it also grapples with family relationships, including my relationship with my father. So this poem, sort of a long one in the book, it's called Some Oz, and there's an epigraph that says it's for my father, because I have sort of a distant relationship with him. I didn't grow up with him for the most part. He was sort of here and there, in and out. But he wrote me a letter as an adult, when I was an adult, that said that he'd always loved that scene in The Wizard of Oz during the tornado when Dorothy looks out the window and everything she knows from her regular life is sort of like swirling by, and it's part of the tornado, and, you know, things are going by on bicycles and whatnot through the window. And he said, write a poem about that. So I did, but I didn't show it to him. So this is that poem, Some Oz. And you might see references to Ohio and Miami, the Miami River, which is in southern Ohio. We stand at the top of the Miamisburg Mound, overlooking the industrial district, a stacked complex of glistening roofs and chain links stapled onto the plains. You want photos of the coming funnel clouds as they birth themselves. You want to be close enough to grab the tail of one like a bridle and ride it into another life. You are dreaming of the Wizard of Oz cyclone scene, the lunatic chickens blind weaving through the dirt, the tumbleweed limbs of uncles blowing into the cellar as the mares bolt for one lick of life unsaddled before the end, and the twister bends like a finger in the distance, beckoning. You are remembering how you envied their abandon the day you watched your mother divide pennies from dimes from baby teeth and let the difference determine how many counties away the next storm would fly her from that place. But your father beat her to it, his cement-dipped boots left on the porch for years, sequined with mill rust, a sad pageant shrine, a reminder to wake into your life, lest you lose yourself to the dream of a sparkling city or a heart still clanging inside a steel man. I am thinking of a postcard you sent me from the Aviation Museum. You know how they flew those old planes, you wrote? Big as boats, but it was all in the slope, aerodynamics. Carve yourself, you wrote, a wing from the shale of this place, something to fly you out of the black basin of old age. You sent that one from the road, our runaway, storm chasing. I'm embellishing again. Those postcards were never sent, and you didn't have to travel to find disaster. You just wanted to be alone with your ache. I've been thinking it wasn't the rush of the storms so much as your love for them. From the first time you scooped the wind onto your tongue and swallowed as much as your tiny body could hold. That sweet-smelling air that parents a stillness you knew in the womb. The murky drown and dazzle of debris among the astral billows, swimming flecks of metal trailer roofs like confetti, the faceted glare of an infant memory, a memory of the world before it settled in your eyes. Even before you saw one, you dreamt its hollow center, you said, a self you recognized. You were mesmerized by its blind anger and promises of change in the boot-scraped landscape of Western Ohio. Where else could it take you? Almost a decade away, and you might have remained on the ground as only a shadow in spin, dropping the occasional postcard to us from that far funnel you lived in, hoping to be tossed into some Oz where your mother and sisters were still thin stalks of beautiful skin, unhusked by time, your father still alive. Some Oz where the clock of your life could unwind. But you've returned to us now, your hands full of years like salvage. And how could you have known what you'd wake to? A home inescapable, and you wearing your father's face. Here on the mound, I understand you feel impossibly heavy. Your mind a foundry of regrets as you search for a word like an opening into some storm strong enough to take us both to a place where your daughters can forgive you. You see why I didn't show it to him, right? He did buy this book, though, so I think he read it. He didn't bring it up. We only talk a couple times a year. So. All right, this is a return to Dorothy. Dorothy sort of comes back throughout the book, between the towns and the personal poems and the fables. Dorothy pops up again and again. So this one is toward the end of the book, and it's called No Place, or Dorothy Returns. Out here, the din of tin on tin hangs just below an orphaned smudge of cumulus, threatening fickle weather. The particular maliciousness of rain in winter says, consider what you'd do for $1. Consider skin. Consider it penance for the runaway's sin, the problem of the absconding heart. Consider it gone. You know home as a word worn through like your name, a threadbare version of you. At dawn, your cowardly companion tells you the dog is missing. They always come back, he says. Don't let him fool you. With the past like a pistol at your back, anyone can be brave. In Kansas, the bent back of your aunt mirrors the sickle. She's threshing herself down to the thinnest husk, her longing now just a paper kernel. The last poem in the book is another town that I found in Ohio. Of course, this book it sort of grapples with my upbringing in Ohio and the urge to both leave home and stay. And what happens when you leave home and you have to kind of come to terms with the idea that your home isn't maybe exactly what you thought it was, for better or worse. So this is called Self-Portrait in Honesty, Ohio. It was a lie. My claim that I'd never stood in a wheat field, never held an ear of corn, the slippery white kernels like buttons between eager fingers. In honesty, Ohio, I'm sorry I said that. I'm sorry I told you I'd never be back. I'm sorry I claimed I saw only gray bones of pavement under rust-licked faces. In honesty, Ohio, I was born on a tilled plot of my mother's corn-fed sorrow, harvested and suckled by yellow funnels of wind. And in honesty, Ohio, there was a wheat field, sharp with empty stalks, soft with fingers. In honesty, there were many. I had put them all away, but lately I've been combing through them at night. I braid their brittle sheaths, finding more and more of them empty. Some crumble in my hands, and that's how sorry I am. So that's it for Runaway, in which I play the runaway. That book, much like my first book, The Rusted City, was very rooted in place and questioning this idea of place. However, both books were also focused a lot on gender and specifically what it's like for women and girls in certain places and certain circumstances. And my third book sort of left place behind a little bit and focused on that, on gender roles and what it's like to grow up as a teenage girl. So this book is called The J Girls, a reality show, because there are 5 characters, fictional characters. Their names all begin with J. I grew up in the 90s, and when I was in school, it kind of seemed like everybody was named Jennifer or Jessica. So, and I didn't have a girl group, so I was sort of like facing the excitement and the danger of being a teenage girl and figuring out what that means for yourself without like the support system of this girl gang. So, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna write a book in which there are girls doing this and they do have each other. So they speak a lot in the collective voice in this book. And it's a reality show because they've decided their lives are important. Unlike what everything tells them, you know, you're a teenage girl in the Rust Belt, who cares about you? They are asserting themselves and their lives as important material. So they decide to make a reality show. And they tape themselves performing monologues, interviews, mock commercials, montages. So all of that's in there in the book. And each poem represents one of those monologues or commercials. So I'm going to read the opening credits, which introduces you to each of these J girls and gives you some details about who they are and where they're from. And I should say, because people always ask, now that I'm a professor and I'm so sophisticated, people are always asking me about my stance on these girls who are not sophisticated. And well, that was me. I was one of these girls. So there's a little bit of me in all of them. Adoration of the J girls. Jocelyn, Jody, Jennifer, Jackie, Joelle. Godville, girl gods of quick fingers and full pockets. The J girls who lap the block garbed in exaltation. Jocelyn of black thongs and push-ups swapped out in dressing rooms. Jody of oxy-filled purses and money to hide. Jennifer of sweater-swaddled kittens from behind garage doors. Jackie of sleeved Slim Jims and pregnancy tests. Joelle of white cutoffs and lilac-bruised thighs. The J-girls who pool hop apartments to christen each other bikini-clad diehards. The J-girls who laugh in spirals and slather themselves with joy. Jocelyn of blue eyeliner and numbers scrawled on her palm. Jody of chlorine green hair and lipstick swiped from the drugstore. Jennifer of translucent eyelids and cheeks stained self-tanner orange. Jackie of Kool-Aid dyed bangs and henna-etched arms. Joelle of mascara freckles and a double dimple on one side. The J-girls who breathe chains of smoke O's from the blessed flames of their mouths and cough together in rounds. Jocelyn of gold-ringed thumbs and Newport 100s, Jody of hemp bracelets and spliffed camel wides, Jennifer of turquoise nails and Virginia Slims, Jackie of silver star anklets and Salem full flavor 85s, Joelle of the filched Zippo and trembling Marlboro ultralights. The J-girls who gospel in gossip of plush tongues and soft slurred consonants and bent-backed vowels. The J-girls who know more than they spill. Jocelyn of pink pig Latin love notes to girls. Jody of the hot dad who got caught jacking cars. Jennifer of married cousins in Springfield. Jackie of the Ms. Mom who smokes pot on her porch. Joelle of the recurring stepfather curse. The J-girls who reign extreme in the kingdom of making do. Jocelyn, queen of hearts in juvie. Jody, queen of flea-bombed carpets and snarling yard mutts. Jennifer, queen of the West Side babysitting ring. Jackie, queen of beaded doorways and leaky waterbeds and torn naga hide. Joelle, queen of lonesome skinny-dipped midnights. The omnipotent J-girls who swim circles through shame. The J-girls who say, no duh, no really, no jinx, no takebacks, no fair, no shit, not sorry, not dead, not hardly, not long but not never, whatever, not finished, not enough, not yet. So now you know who they are. The next one I'm going to read is a monologue from Jackie, but this is in the collective voice, as a lot of the poems are. And each of these comes with a little scene description, since this is meant to be a reality show. So the scene description says that Jackie's standing in a mall. She's sitting in the mall. She's sitting at a table in a crowded food court. I'm thinking about who's going to get these references. Anyone between 30 and 40. But behind her, Orange Julius, Sparrow, Charlie's Subs, an empty storefront. That was my adolescence, and those stores are all gone now. So Jackie's sitting there in the food court, and Jody is sitting behind her, facing the camera, doing all kinds of distracting things in the scene. Mall haunts. Born at the food court's dead end, we spit our gum-chewed brains on the pavement and cultivate a hollow gaze. We make ourselves dead ringers for dum-dums with our sticky grab-me legs and polished bobbleheads. Inside, we're rotten as our mother's guess, black hearts spongy with soft-core decadence. We gild our gory parts with peach and glitter, but corpsey flesh peeks through in streaks and lacquer chips. Men circle at the restrooms, sniffing decay in our gloss-peeled lips. Eager flies abound. Faux-oblivious, we claw shop racks and moan, shine-hungry lunatics who proffer tongues like zombies. A possum play to ward off predatory haze. Sometimes all we find is fear, but it makes a slimming bind as lining or a gorgeous drape, so we wear it home and call ourselves drop dead. Many of these poems are meant to take some of the darker, more dangerous situations that teenage girls find themselves in and kind of play with them and play with language in order to find joy and agency for the girls without necessarily ignoring the darker stuff or the dangers. I'm not going to read too many of the darker poems, but that's something that's kind of underlying all of this is teenage girls figuring out that their sexuality is a source of power for them, but also a way to keep them kind of under the thumb of gender roles. So they're dealing with both. Two of the girls, Joelle and Jackie, Jocelyn. Joelle and Jocelyn have this kind of relationship with each other that is ambiguous. They're friends, sometimes they're more than friends, and then they're not, and then they are, and then they're not. And there's a lot of back and forth as they kind of deal with what it means to be queer before there was really even a community for that in some places. So they're dealing with that. And this is a poem from Joelle to Jocelyn. It's called Thigh High. A contact buzz, the muscular twitch beyond the suede itch of looking at a constellation of blue veins under ice. Sometimes desire says, break it. So I lay a hand on you with a laugh, with a girl I know. Your tiny hairs catch like breaths on my finger grooves. Razor burn blooms like specks of fire and spreads through goosebumps, little triggers. I want to test you. You let me press your ink and citrus bruises, and it's nearly enough. I phantom grip your stretch marks like electric currents between my teeth at night. Desire is a far cry from the men's palms that cup our thighs without asking. Touch as a caller to say, mine. Once, two boys flanked us while walking, asking each other whether they liked our legs better, jiggling or still. We both giggled, but I thought, what do they know about gravity? The sky bowed behind you all afternoon, waiting for permission. Girl, you are a hall of mirrors falling on me. You are the end of looking. I crush my eyes to crumbs, and you dizzy them to the ground, the softest shattering. That actually happened to me, by the way, with a friend. I remember that, walking, two boys talking about our bodies as we were walking with them. And, you just kind of accept these things when you're 15, 16, and then you get to be 30, and you're like, wait a minute, I have to reprocess my entire adolescence. So that's a little bit what this book is. This next one is called Ode on My Upspeak. And this is a monologue from Jackie, Jackie's like the woke one in the group. Jackie's a little more well-read. Jackie does tarot, things like that. So the poems that are a little more savvy are Jackie's. If you don't know what upspeak is, that's something that a while ago, women and girls, especially on the radio, were getting criticized for. It's a way of speaking where you end your sentences as if they're questions. So your voice goes up at the end. And I think this is a way of talking that girls have learned from each other just by being in that community. You talk the way your people talk around you. But then there was all this criticism of them for doing that. I don't like listening to that on the radio. It sounds terrible. So I decided to write a poem in defense of ways of speaking. So Jackie's standing at a microphone in front of a closet door. She's wearing a hot pink wig and matching pink sneakers. She loves matching. Ode on my upspeak. I admire its belligerent uncertainty. I'll know if I know when I please. Pointed indecision as auto prick that sticks my sentence tip. When my tongue spring toes into a run, I vault across silences. Surprised but satisfied. I want all my action rising, okay? While we're at it, I dig my ums. Impervious little monks who squat in well-spaced rows, their insistent vibrato a hypno chant that spins my speech to incantation. I love how they punctuate, bead-like, my vocal fry, that holy string to which I cling. Its creak makes me speak like a crumb scraper savoring the linen tablecloth. I lick the conversation down and shake each glottal rattle at the sky, my diphthong kernels popping in a thrum that sets me singing like an optimist. I've got nowhere to go but up. All right, the last poem I'm going to read from this book is It's the last poem in the book, or almost, before the closing credits. And this is a response from Jocelyn to Joelle. So Thigh High was Joelle speaking to Jocelyn. This is Jocelyn speaking to Joelle. And they're inside a McDonald's, sitting in a booth. And every so often, I won't read these parts, but an employee cuts in and sort of calls for like double cheeseburger, order 209, that kind of thing. McDonald's forever. I want to wade there with you on a snow day, wheeze-winded and teary. I want to smash the ice in your lashes, then let the oily steam breathe us back to running blood. Or I want to walk there in crop tops we'll swap in the lime fluorescence of the slime-tiled John, so we can walk home as one another. I want to wooze in your cherry menthol aura as we find every flickering arch in the city. Delicate liquor of grease-dipped French tips, send me a Rite Aid Valentine that says, be my bitch, and I'll be yours. No takebacks, no beef, no joke, no jinx. When I answered that trick crush question with, you? You who then flipped and tramped the whole year solo. But I swear on your stuck-up spine, we can walk it all back with Big Macs and 1,000 half-hug pats. Please let's just meet on the mouth of a straw, suck it up, crush only our cups, and let the years drip down the sewer slats as we walk back and back and back. All right. I'm just going to read one more poem, and this is a new one. I was debating whether or not to read a new poem, but I think I will. So I'm working on this new series that is sort of somewhere between poetry and nonfiction. Each piece is a 300 to 400 word prose piece about a work of visual art or performance art made by a woman. And I'm sort of weaving in my response to that art with personal memories. So this one's in response to a piece of performance art that you might have heard of. This was a piece that Marina Abramovic did a while ago called The Artist is Present. And she has a long history of performance art, so she already had kind of a following. And so she decided I think it was MoMA or something like that, she set up a table in the middle of a room with 2 chairs. And she sat at one chair, and anybody else who visited the museum could sit in the other chair, and they would just sit and stare at each other. There was no conversation, it was just eye contact. Which sounds kind of silly, but what ended up happening was people were having these incredibly intense experiences, because to maintain eye contact with someone like that for a long time, it gets intense, it's very emotional. And eventually they took the table away, so it was just 2 chairs. So I was very interested in this table and chairs and what happens around a table. So this is about that, and about a toxic academic job that I used to have that I don't have anymore. It started over a table, as awkward conversation does. I've heard there was a lot of crying in this one. People would crumble, leak, tear their own faces off as the artist sat in silence. Everyone got time across from her, a way to feel seen. One night, at a dinner party, my chair served me her best gossip over pork tenderloin. A man in our department had wooed a lesbian in dance, and they'd married and adopted a child. Then the lesbian decided she wanted to be a lesbian again and divorced the man for a woman. This is another quote from the chair. It's just that she made such a big deal about being gay, and then she switched. I think she felt the switch hit her body, my chair. It was a betrayal of the either-or life she'd been given. We sat on the same side of the table, and she felt close to me, and for all she knew, I was straight because there were limits to what she could see. I sat in silence until she politely filled it. Weather or traffic. When I quit my job a year later, she cried. Nobody knows how hard I try. I can count all the people I've cried to on one hand, I thought, and kept my arms crossed so she couldn't see herself in me. Some people wanted to reach a hand out to her, the artist. If you look long enough, eye contact becomes indistinguishable from touch. Eventually, the table was taken out of the performance, and the boundary between bodies slipped away. "I'm just a mirror," she said. When I watch the footage, I can still see it. That table, like every table I've scooted up to in my life, and me, quietly setting all the limits like cutlery. Thank you. I guess I can just stay
So
up
Dr.
here.
Hurd has agreed to take questions from the audience here if there are questions. Don't be shy. Maybe repeat the question for those watching online.
Yes. So she asked in the book in which I play the runaway for the Dorothy series, had I always felt a connection to Dorothy, or did I pursue that for the book? Is that right? Yeah. So I think that I had always been kind of interested in Dorothy. I had read a lot of retellings, other books that kind of retold Dorothy's story and other characters' stories. So I was interested in that as something that could be retold. And then I had various series and pieces that I didn't know were going to be a book. And once I started looking at them together, I thought, okay, Dorothy does have a place here in this book with these weird towns and everything else. So then I kind of pursued the interest that already existed to include Dorothy.
Well, I have a question of my own, which is I'm always mystified by how writers write. So the poems that you just read, are those things that are just birthed in their complete form with punctuation, stanzas, and shape, or is it something that you start a piece and you leave it aside, months later you come back to it? Or maybe you could talk a little bit about your creative process.
Sure, yeah. I don't think, maybe once or twice in my whole life has a piece kind of just like emerged mostly whole. Most of the time I'm writing fragments, I'm keeping track of fragments, and then later I'm kind of piecing them together. I think a poem has to, or an essay, has to kind of ruminate in my mind for a long time before I'm able to actually produce any writing on it. So it's a very long, slow process, and it's a lot of puzzle piecing. When I talked to the classes earlier today about lyricism and free association in writing, I had them do an exercise where I asked them to kind of free associate and just get everything down first, and then figure out later how it all fit together. And that's mostly my process, especially for these new ones.
Great. Now, a quick follow-up question. Are you somebody who writes on paper and these little scraps are actual scraps, or are you somebody who composes things digitally and they're little snippets that are held out in the ether somewhere on your hard drive or the cloud?
I'm a computer writer. I think by the time I started really pursuing writing seriously, I was in college, so everything was on the computer. It's like 2005. So I just got used to using a computer. So I have a paper journal, but honestly, I think a lot of what gets written in there gets like forgotten about. I should go back to those journals. But no, I compose just, in a Word document most of the time.
I'm curious about with J-Girls. It seems that obviously all the girls are operating in the same sort of space, and as the girls want to do, you start to pick up each other's sort of theories and perceiving language. So when you're composing these different voices, when you're trying to differentiate between them, the stance, I would think, is a really big, important part of that, because maybe they share some sort of diction, maybe they share, leaps of register and things like that. So do you really think about the stance that you're bringing into a poem when you're trying to differentiate between the speakers?
So that's an interesting question, because this is something I struggled with. I'm not a fiction writer. I'm not a novelist. So having like fictional characters and thinking about who they are and how they speak was kind of new to me. some of the poems existed before I had those characters. So then that was a matter of like figuring out which character would this poem fit. And then from there, writing new poems in those voices of those characters. And I think I started to figure out their various registers and quirks as I was already kind of going and already in it.
Because I just think I'm always the speaker. So it's hard to get out of my own way most of the time.
Yeah, it's funny. My first 3 books, they're all technically, I guess, fictional. You could say they're not very autobiographical, but there's autobiography kind of like buried in each of them. But you have to look through the fiction to find it. And this new project, it's very sort of autobiographical. Just it's terrifying because I'm just sort of like exposing myself there on the page. So that's been a new feeling.
Great. Well, that microphone right.
Microphone.
There you go.
Perfect timing. Check. I wondered if you had some favorite poets when you were younger that really inspired you, and maybe you even imitated their style, and then maybe some of your favorite poets now.
Yeah. When I came to poetry, it was, I think a lot of women might tell you this, it was Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton. I mean, I hadn't been taught their poems in high school. In high school, we read Shakespeare and canonical stuff. And then I got to college and I was reading Anne Sexton and Sylvia Plath and learning about their lives and their stories. And it was like, oh, poetry can do this. Of course, there was a lot more that poetry could do that I didn't even know about yet. But that was kind of what pulled me in. And then as I kind of went along, I got more and more interested in people writing really weird stuff, cross-genre, hybrid. Is it fiction? Is it poetry? Is it nonfiction? What is it? That kind of thing. I'm a huge fan of Anne Carson. She does a lot of that. Novels in verse, essays that are actually poems, poems that are actually essays, that kind of thing. Harriet Mullen is another poet I'm really into. She does so much sound work. All of the logic in her poems is driven by sound. Getting from one idea to the next is about musical echoes. So that's another favorite of mine.
Great. Well, I know Dr. Hurt's going to hang around here for a few minutes if you have additional questions. We do also have some tasty snacks over on the table here. Please take some time to hang around and chat with people. That's the beauty of live events, is you can actually still interact with people. So please don't run out of the building. Stop for a while and maybe put your hands together and thank Dr. Rochelle Hurt.
Thank you.